Okay, starting today on page Samech Aleph, we started a new mimer, which I believe the 7th mimer in the Hemshech, Parshas Noach. He doesn't speak much about Noach, as the truth. Just jumps right back into his conversation. And what is the conversation? We're saying back to the original theme of the separation between light and darkness on the first day of creation, that this was not a regular separation of darkness because darkness and light are already implicitly separated. They don't need to be separated. But rather, the darkness was an aspect of light. So the two aspects of light have to be separated. Light, which is called light, and light, which is called darkness. And we narrowed it down to what is the light, which is called darkness? It's the kav. Right? Because the kav is that light which comes after the tzimtzum, and its whole function is to enlighten the darkness and the metzias of the world. So therefore it's called darkness because it shines up the darkness of the world. And we went at great length saying it does that in two ways, both his skafia and his hapcha, in avoda, i.e. It subjugates the world, and that's a form of enlightening it, and it transforms the world. Anyway, all this is accomplished by the kav, which is called darkness. So then we'll go back inside here, the second paragraph on this page. Right? We actually said this a little bit, but we'll just say it again. And this is what it says in the Zohar, Keser ilah, afal gav di'u or kadmon or tzach u'metzuch ukam hu kadam ilah ha'ilos. So Keser elyon, the higher Keser, even though it's what's called an or kadmon, which we'll explain in a second what that is, but it's a primordial light, and it's a totally refined light, it's nevertheless considered black in front of the Ilah Ha'ilos, the cause of all causes. What is Ilah Ha'ilos? What is this cause of all causes that is so high that it makes the Keser Elyon even look black? It's called Malchus de Ein Sof Shlifnei HaTzimtzum. So Malchus de Ein Sof Shlifnei HaTzimtzum, what is Malchus de Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum? So before the Tzimtzum, you basically have, we called it before, and he's going to mention it again, Tihara Ilah, Tihara Tata. Remember these descriptions? The higher purity and the lower purity. What is the higher purity and the lower purity? Does anyone remember that? Anybody knows? So the lower purity, we'll start with, is after Hashem removes all the light and creates the Makom Panoi, the empty space. He then fills it with a certain light. He brings the light of the Kav back, and the entire space fills up again. And the fact that the space fills up again, it has in it a light which is the source and the makar of all the light that's ever going to come into any of the worlds. So that's called Tihara Tata. It's a giant cloud of all the lights that will ever be before the further tzimtzum delineate them. And it's called the lower purity. So what's the higher purity? The higher purity is the light before the tzimtzum that filled that space. In other words, it seems that there's light also beyond that space before the tzimtzum. In other words, before the tzimtzum, what do you have? You have infinite light. But you're also going to have a theoretical space which was not cleared out yet, right? Which is going to be emptied and then filled with the kav, which is going to create the tahara tata, the lower tihara. Before it gets emptied out, it's full with Or Ein Sof. And it's basically, essentially indistinguishable from the Or Ein Sof everywhere else. It's like a drop of water inside of the ocean. It's just sitting there, but nonetheless, it is filling that space. So it's really Or Ein Sof, but they call it Malchus de Ein Sof, because it's that aspect of light which is going to get removed and brought back. The truth of the matter is that it's not the only light filling that space. In other words, the whole ocean is also, so to speak, filling that space. Right? There's two levels of light. There's like Spheros Adein Kates, infinite Spheros, and then there's these 10 theoretical Spheros chosen amongst infinite, and both of them are, in a certain sense, filling that space before the Tzimtzum. Right? There's like infinite Spheros, and there's also like a theoretical idea that there's 10 in that place. When he removes everything from that place, he removes both sets of lights. He removes the Or Ein Sof and the Malchus of Ein Sof. You following any of this? And then when he brings it back, he only brings back the 10 Spheros that were there. The infinite light never returns, as it were. I mean, it's all kind of at a certain level of infinite light. But the Spheros Adein Kates, the infinite numbers of Spheros, different types of Spheros, they never come back. He only brings back into that space the 10. And that's called, then when they come back, it's called Tihara Tata, the lower purity. So, where have we gotten out of all this? That the Ilah HaIlah, right, this thing which is called the cause of all causes, which is such a high light that it makes, quote unquote, Keser Elyon to be like black in front of it. It's called Malchus of Ein Sof. It's the light which filled the space before the Tzimtzum. Clear on this? Any questions? I don't want to run by if anyone has. If you're like, have no idea what I'm talking about, now's the chance to get a word in.
So everything was filling the Makam Pani, or just the Tzurei Allah?
Basically everything, but what he wants to say is that the very fact that it was delineated and separated from all the rest of the light somewhere, that's why we call it Tihar Light. It's like a special name, because whatever was in there, again, what was in there was the same as everything that was everywhere else. So this is all like a theoretical delineation. But that whatever was inside of there, that theoretical delineation is called Tihar Light. It really is everything, but there's the everything at that point is essentially divided into two things which are at that stage they're meshed together as one, like a drop of water in the ocean. There is no drop of water. The reason
why they're different is because they come back after Tzimtzum or everything else.
Right. Well, basically that's not the only reason why they're different. They're very different. These are finite 10 spheros, and that's like an infinite thing that cannot be described. But the fact of the matter is, before they get delineated from each other and separated, they're indistinguishable and they're one. So you see what I'm saying? So they're both sort of there. Is that clear?
Before Tzimtzum, they're all infinite.
They're all infinite, but it's like a drop of water in the ocean, right? And before you remove it from the ocean, is it really a drop of water? It is and it isn't. In other words, it's in a certain place which is distinct from the rest of the ocean, but because that place has not yet been delineated, that quality of water is no different from the ocean on one level, right? On the other hand, it has drop-like qualities in it because essentially it's the part that can be separated eventually. So there's these two types of things that are residing there simultaneously.
And these were the 10 attributes that Hashem chose to use to shine through and use.
Yeah, they're eventually going to become the 10 attributes of the world. Yeah.
But I'm saying Hashem could have, in essence, picked up 10 different spheros and shown
theoretically. That's what we say, that this choice is unbelievable, because that's a crazy thing to choose, right? These 10 out of infinite, it must show that these 10 have some very deep inner connection with Hashem's essence itself. And that's the idea of the chosenness of God. The whole idea of Rosh Hashanah, He chose us, and it's even higher than being infinite, is to be finite and chosen by God. Because why did He choose these finite as opposed to those? It must show you that there's something essential about this choice, which essentially comes down to a conversation that you and I were having in the forest there. It's like the idea of this finite reality is the finite reality. It's the one that God chose. It's not any other. Yeah, Yom Tov.
Seems like there's so many different worlds and layers, so it gets confusing, but the sphere are basically 10 steps from God to us. Is that the concept?
Yeah, basically, in a certain sense.
So then you talk about 4 worlds.
No, because essentially,
layers,
so let's explain it for a second. There's 10 spheros, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like DNA. Mm-hmm. DNA, it has a certain intrinsic pattern in its own right, but then it can make all kinds of. You're busy with the crack.
No. I was throwing that away so it wouldn't make noise.
All right. So I'm saying the DNA, it has a certain pattern in its own right, but then that pattern can be applied in all different types of things. The same DNA that makes a human being, DNA also makes a chicken and a rock, right? So in other words, you're using the same essential 10 spheros, but the way that they manifest can vary widely. You understand? So basically, there's this grouping of 10 spheros, but depending on what world they're in, right? Every world has the same 10 spheros in it. It's just that they're measured to apply to a different reality. There's billions and billions of spheres, but they're all the same 10 repeated over and over and over again, and that's what makes they come down a level. So there's this. The 10 spheres of Atzilus, and there's 10 spheres of Bria and of Yetzira. What makes it different is that they have stronger casings and different coverings which hide or reveal them more. But essentially, it's all 10, and the same 10, just in different dimensions.
Wasn't there something with the number 4, like there's 4 layers or 4
because
levels?
the 10 itself can be divided into 4. In other words, the 10 Sfiros really has 4 quadrants to it. Right? So you have the 10 Sfiros, you have Chokhmah is the Yud of Hashem's name. Bina is the Hey of Hashem's name. Then you have the 6 Sfiros of emotions, that's the Vav of Hashem's name, and then the final Sfir of Malchus is the final Hey of Hashem's name. So that 10 Sfiros is synonymous with Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is of division into 4. So therefore, it's really the same thing, just sort of magnified, so you can look at it what it is in deeper detail.
We need a chart. It has to say from God to us. That's the top of it.
Hainu bechinas tihara ilah. So this level called Malchus de Ein Sof is called, before the Tzimtzum, is called tihara ilah. As it says, the Devrei Shomanisa de Malka. Right? The Zohar's lashon is in the beginning of the will of the king. Right? Before he did anything, in the beginning of his will, bechinas aliyas haratzon apashut shebaor Ein Sof shlitnei Tzimtzum. And what does this mean? This language of the Zohar in the beginning of the will of the king, it means the aliyas haratzon, when it went up in Hashem's mind. His ratzon apashu, which means it was not a delineated will, it was a general will for wanting worlds in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. Allah b'ratzon apashu la'atzim livro. He decided. In other words, there was a point, like so to speak, before Hashem decided, you could say, and there was a point when Hashem said, "I have a will." Having a will is already some kind of a description of something. Even though what we're going to say is a ratzon pashit, it's a simple will without much description. It's a thing. All of a sudden, I want to emanate the worlds and to create the worlds and to form the worlds. That he decided on it. Right? And this place is before he even made the tzimtzum. So in other words, it was this decision that had nothing. We spoke about in a class long ago. It had mamish nothing to do with action. It was a type of decision, like I think you brought it up. It's let's say someone wants to make aliyah. Or someone knows one day they want to get married, right? But they're only 14, right? So that's a decision it's not nogeya lamaisa at all. It's just a deep inner will, which you're not going to do anything about that will or enact that will. It's just sort of a will which is implicit inside of you. And so this is what it means. It's inside the Or Ein Sof before anything actually happened. And it's called the Ratzon HaPashut. And in this place, when in the Ratzon HaPashut, it says Galifo B'tiyari La. So we talked about before, galif, the word galif means to carve. Right? That he's essentially carved osios into that place called Tihara Ilah. And we said, what would those osios look like? Those are called the osios of the Rashima. Those are the letters, the origin of all letters, essentially, which the analogy we gave for them was the letters of the Luchos. The letters of the Luchos. What's the uniqueness about the letters of the Luchos? Is that it was a engraving into stone where the actual material of the letter was not there. In other words, it's an aleph carved through stone. So someone says, okay, remove the stone and give me the aleph that's sitting there. The aleph that's sitting there has no matzi. It's not made out of anything. It's an absence of something. Unlike, say, for example, letter in the Sefer Torah, where the aleph on the parchment has a matzias to it, and you can hold it in your hand, you can scrape it off. There's a thing there. So the idea about these letters that were galifo b'tihari ilah, that Hashem put letters inside of this place called the Or Ein Sof, and yet it remains pashit, because pashit means there's no description, no delineation there, there's no real division there. How can you have letters filling this place and there's no division? Because the letters are empty. They're letters of air. They're letters which are non-materialistic letters in any sense. That's why the analogy for it is the letters of the Luchos. So this is this idea. In other words, they don't negate his simple unity, because they don't sort of
they don't really exist.
They don't really exist in a normal sense. Okay, so but what this is called is hashara b'koach. He takes sort of a hashara is a evaluation in potential. He divides up everything in potential. That's what all these letters are, but it's only in potential because they're absent letters that are absent. And this is all taking place before the Tzimtzum in this place called Malchus of Ein Sof or Tihara Ilah. So now what are we getting to? There's this phrase from the Zohar that we're trying to describe, that even though the Keser Elyon is an Or Kadmon, the Keser Elyon is this very high light, it's considered black before Ilah HaIlos, before the cause of all causes. And now we've just gone to describe what the cause of all causes is. The cause of all causes is Tihara Ilah. right? So Keser Elyon, where's Keser Elyon? It's obviously not up that high, right? Where's Keser Elyon? What is it a Keser of? Atzilus, right? So basically, it's all the worlds above Atzilus. In other words, it's essentially what it means is after the Tzimtzum, right? You have this idea of measured light that's going to fill into the worlds. That's the top of it, all the way down until Atzilus, is called Keser Ilah. And as much as that is the highest light of all the worlds, it's considered black before Ilah HaIlahs, which comes before the Tzimtzum. The Tihara Ilah. The Hagam she'enu b'geder makor la'olamos chulu kanal. Makom makom harei al b'ratzonu al kol panim. So even though this Tihara Ilah, as we mentioned a moment ago, is not even in the category of being a source to the worlds. Like we said, this interest of this 14-year-old to get married, it's not Nogea Lamaisa, it's in a state of total havdalah from anything that's actually going to happen later. It's a total theoretical, and therefore it can't even be called a source, because a source of something in some way leads into the effect that comes out of the cause. If it's called a source, that means it has relative connection with the thing that comes out of the source. And since this level is creation is not really going to come from it, there has to be a whole bunch of processes, including the total removal of all the light, etc., in order to actually make creation. This is therefore not even called the source of the world. Even though there's 10 spheros there, and they are the same 10 spheros that are eventually going to be the world, it's so far removed, it's not called a source.
But if it wasn't there, then nothing would have happened.
True. But you understand what we're saying? It's not called a source. It's removed. So nonetheless, it is, even though it's so high, can't be called the source. It's still nonetheless called the Al B'Ratzon. It still went up in his mind. In other words, in his will, there's still something going on there. And in compared to that, Keser Ilah is called Akum. It's called black. Ukam. L'famim mifarshim Ilah Ilos al b'chinas reishis gilui akav. So now he's changing the story on us. He says that's the normal Ilah HaIlos. Is the Tihara Ilah, Malchus of Ein Sof, that level before the Tzimtzum. He says, however, sometimes we say that Ilah HaIlos, that the cause of all causes, is a different level. And what it's called, Reishis Gilui HaKav. It's the beginning of the Kav coming out after the Tzimtzum. Right? That's also sometimes called the cause of all causes, which makes Keser Ilah look black. And what is the Reishis Gilui HaKav? Okay, so after the Tzimtzum, there's the initial return of the light, right? It's like a point of light which is going to eventually become the Kav. That initial return of the light even is so high that it makes Keser Ilah be considered black.
Did the Kav ever go away?
What's that?
Was Kav removed or Kav always stayed?
Kav was removed.
Kav was also removed.
Yeah. Both the drop and the ocean were removed. And then only the drop came back. And that's the Kav. So the Kav had a place before the Tzimtzum, but its place was like a drop in the middle of an ocean, which is not there. All you have is ocean. That's what I was trying to say before. It's like there theoretically, and that's what we're describing right now. Malchus of Ein Sof is the theoretical source of the Kav, but it's merely theoretical, because before you make a Tzimtzum, you haven't separated the drop from the ocean.
So the second Kav is coming again. Is that Ak?
That is going to become Ak. The first world that it forms is called Ak. But what we're saying right now is the moment that it comes...
Which is which world?
What?
The first world.
The first world is Ak, we said, right? But but before you... It's Ak. No, Ak is its own world. Adam Kadmon. It's far above Atzilus. But the point is that before it even becomes Adam Kadmon, and before it even becomes Keser of Adam Kadmon, quite frankly, right? It's the idea of this Reishis Hizgalus, just the beginning of the Kav's coming back, and that in some Maimarim is called Ilah HaIlos. It's called the cause of all causes, which makes Keser Elyon look black. Kamoshu Lamaila Mimbechinis Ak. Right? So that's what we're saying. This the first revelation of the Kav is as it is above Ak. So what's Ak? You know what Ak? We just said Adam Kadmon, which is what? The first world that fills back up this empty space. It fills the whole space again. Adam Kadmon is essentially what we called before Tihara Tata, the lower Tihara. And it was when that space gets filled up again with infinite light of the order of the Kav, But there's a little place in between. Before the place gets filled up with light of Tihara Tata and becomes the world of Adam Kadmon, there's the initial revelation of the Kav. And that's called the cause of all causes. And it says in the Lashon of Kabbalah and the Arizal that there's something called something like Atik, which stands at the above the skull of Ak. Right? So the skull representing the idea of Keser, right? In general, like our skull is our Keser. It's like the crown that goes above the brain, the crown. And he's saying that there's Temimei Keser, right? And that's called Atik. So you have Keser itself in general is broken into Arich and Atik, two parts. So the part which is sort of the brain is the lower part of Keser, and what's above this is called this Ilah HaIlos. The Reishis is Galus HaKav, the beginning of the Kav is like the Atik of Ak. And compared to that, then even Keser, Ilah, is called black. Stop here, make sure everyone understands what I'm saying. Is it just total Chinese, or you're with me?
Well, I think so. Is that not Keser Ilah?
Keser Ilah, as he's saying, is the skull itself of Ak, it seems.
Galgalta.
Yeah, the Galgalta of Ak is like the Keser.
Is Galgalta in level within Keser, or is Galgalta the term that we use for Keser? Because I've learned that it's a level within Keser.
Okay, but that's what we're saying here as well. In other words, it's the lower part of Keser, according to what he's saying here. Because he's saying that there's something above that called Atik, right? Which means that even though the Galgalta itself is a type of Keser, there's something which is above that Keser, which is Atik of Ak. And he's saying that's the beginning, the Reishis is Galus HaKav, the beginning of the Kav coming out.
Not to confuse things, but where's Tohu and Tikkun in this?
It comes later.
It's after?
Yeah. It comes later. Basically, the next step, if you want to put it like this, the Spheros in the Or Ein Sof, before they come out, they're like non-entities whatsoever, right? Then when they come out after the Tzimtzum in Ak, they're there, but there's so much light of infinite light that the potential Spheros, which are of the order of 10, they're really unrecognizable in their individuality yet. They're there. They're much more recognizable in their individuality than they were when they were the drop inside the ocean. But even when the drop comes out by itself after the ocean, it's still tinged with this infinite light, and all the individual spheros are still bound together as one. So they're very indistinguishable.
This is before Tohu.
This is before Tohu.
Tohu they separate.
And then that's the whole point. The next stage is that those spheros which are there separate.
This is pre-Tohu.
Right? Okay. So, it's explained elsewhere. Shezeu Reishis HaKav. So, what is this level called? The Atik upon over Ak. So it said this is the Reishis HaKav. So we have two opinions. What's considered Ilah HaIlos, the cause of all causes, either the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum or the initial revelation of the Kav afterwards. But either way, it turns Keser Ilah into something black. Va'inyinu. When it comes to the Kav itself, there's two levels. According to what we said earlier in a different mimer. Before this one, we spoke about this idea that the Kav is essentially of the level of the Or Ein Sof Habli Gavul. So even though the Kav is already a measured light and it's limited, and therefore how could you really call this the Or Ein Sof, like the infinite light? So we said before that really, the fact is that the Or Ein Sof, its whole job is to just reveal itself and be infinite, right? So the fact is that even though it has to transfer itself through the Rishimo and sort of be filtered through the Tzimtzum and the Rishimo, the fact is that while in one sense that does color the light and make it a measured light, but the etzem inyan of light shining, no matter where it is that it's infinite light. It's the return of the Or Ein Sof. The fact that some stencil comes upon it and makes it look as though it can be divided up, it doesn't mean that the light itself is divided up, right? The light itself is the same Or Ein Sof from before. It's just that it's going through this process of encountering the Rishimo, which gives it this feeling that it's implicitly divided. But the very fact that there is light shining and it's light of the Or Ein Sof, it's still the same Or Ein Sof, and therefore it's really a bli gavul light. So we're saying this is one aspect of the Kav, is it's just a throwback to the Or Ein Sof and a return of infinity on one level. Meaning what? There's two parts of God, essentially. Kiviyachol. There's his ability to be finite and his ability to be infinite. His ability to be finite is like letters and contraction. His ability to be infinite is light. So the fact is that anytime you see light, it's a throwback to Hashem's ability to be infinite. So the fact that the Kav is shining, even though it's a measured light, it's the only measured part of it is that it's mixed in with it Hashem's power of finite. But the light part of it, the fact that it's light, is just a throwback to Hashem's power of being infinite. So you shouldn't confuse the Kav that it's really implicitly measured. The very fact that it's light means it's infinite
Why
by
does
its
light
nature.
mean infinite?
What's that?
Why does light mean infinite?
Because light comes off of Hashem's essence, right? And therefore, it's always going in an unending way of trying to define his essence. So in other words, if you have something which is indescribable and you start to describe it, you'll never stop describing it. It goes on forever. And that's what the Or Ein Sof is. It's trying to bring something which is undescribable to light. So the light goes on forever. Every possible type of light, every measure of light that you could possibly have, that's the definition of infinite. It's trying to
The light
describe
itself,
God.
which is trying to describe the Mar, itself is...
That's what makes it infinite, because you can't describe the Mar, or you can try, but you'll go on forever. So that whole notion of light is infinite. So even if I take a piece of it, it's still coming from the same source. It's still infinite. And that's what we say, that the Kav in Etzem is coming from Hashem's koach of bli gavul, in infinite power. So you say, wait a second, is it really infinite? The whole idea of the Kav is that it's measured and it's just a ray. A ray has a top and a ray has a bottom and it has sides. In other words, this is not infinite light. The reason why you see that it has a measure and a weight, so to speak, who b'chinas Kav Hamida, and to the point that we actually call it the measuring stick, right? The Kav Hamida. Why is it called the Kav? Kav means it's a measuring stick. Everything gets measured from it. That's not really from the Kav. That's the imposition of the other power of Hashem upon it, which is Hashem's power of finite, which imposes measure and limitation upon this infinite thing. So the Kav is like sort of this schizophrenic over here. He's got two completely different and opposite qualities inside of him. From the standpoint of the light, he's totally infinite. From the standpoint of the vessels, it's divided up. We had a whole mimer about this. Therefore, we find that the Kav has two opposite things going on. On one hand, it's a measurer. In other words, all things, you and I, and the chairs and the tables and the universe, it all has a certain limit to it, and that limit is given by the Kav. In other words, the Kav is the very first entry into the world of all potential things that will be in any world. So it's delineating out each creature's limitations. So we call it the measuring stick, not because it has a measure, but because it measures everything else. Shemoded medidas ha'oros va'kelim. It measures out all of the measurements of the lights and the vessels everywhere. Kanal, as we said earlier. So that's one nature of the Kav, that it has this measured quality. On the other side, it's also the thing which unites all things. As we say in Pasach Eliyahu, Antu de Kasherlo. You are he who unites everything and makes everything one. So if its true nature was to just delineate everything, then that would show that it's essentially a divider. But since the reality is that same thing which delineates everything, it also makes sure that everything is interconnected and one. That's like light, who doesn't know from limitation. It just creates unity in everything. So it has, and that also comes from the Kav. If it wasn't for the Kav, there would be no unifying factor within everything in creation. So it has a dual nature. The Cain, yeah.
Two questions. One is, how does this book in relationship to the Tanya? Because it seems like...
All right, well, I have to answer that another time. It's too off the topic.
Too complex.
And what else?
there's the infinite, and then there's the finite, and then there's all this surreal stuff going in between. And is that what we're talking about? I'm trying to get an overview because it's very confusing. All these dimensions and worlds and layers and stuff like that. So I'm trying to understand like what it is you're trying to overall say, basically, that like there's God, we'll never understand fully. Then there's us, which we kind of, we can relate to a cup of coffee. And then there's layers and layers of all these different things happening. Is that what's...
Yeah, we're describing those different layers and how the process takes place to make it from infinite to finite.
So that's what this whole book is overall saying.
The book overall, I'm not gonna say that. How can I say anything like that?
Okay, maybe this particular topic today.
We'll read it 10, 15 times, the whole book, and then we'll have a daring enough to say what its overall point is. But I'm saying it's we're going through asking questions, giving answers. Basically, our basic question that's guiding us is, what does it mean that Hashem divided light from darkness? That's the basic question of the whole book. And we say that darkness is really a different type of light. So
the whole book is based on.
Well, that's the question. That's the question that's driving us right now. It has been since the beginning.
The darkness is still light. It's just.
We said darkness is light. But it's a different type of light. So there's two different types of light. So without getting all crazy and there's levels, there's basically two levels, right? There's light and there's another type of light which is called darkness, a different type of light. And now what we just decided and understood is that the first light is like the Or Ein Sof, and the second light, which is called darkness, is called the Kav. And you know what this is, right? The Or Ein Sof is removed, and then a small line of light returned into the empty space, and that small line of light is called the Kav, and that light is called darkness. So there was somehow a separation of light from darkness, and that's what we're describing, how the one came from the other. And at present, we're describing how it's not so simple, because even after the Kav comes out, it still is tinged with infinite. In other words, it has two parts. The Kav is called a line. Okay? So anyway...
Stencil is the Yeshiva. Well, is that right?
What did you ask?
It's just a lot. No, it's just a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in. It is a lot to take in. Agreed.
Just following up on that. So, is this recreating every day? This is a current recreation, or this was in the beginning of...
No, everything's happening constantly. Yeah. Okay, so second thing we were saying is that the Kav also has a unifying factor. Not only does it measure everything and make everything distinct from each other, but it also unifies them all. It also has this property where it's able to make them switch places. In other words, this phrase, he doesn't go into it here, but elsewhere it's described. What does it mean that they switch places? There's the concept of having the light of chesed in the kli of gevura, and vice versa. In other words, which means that there's all kinds of inter-inclusion possibilities that can happen. In other words, even though let's say Hillel comes from the side of chesed, right? But in a few places, Hillel paskins l'gevura. He's strict, and the same thing. Shammai is sometimes paskins lahatir, right, to be lenient. So even though Hillel's soul comes from chesed, he would normally always paskin in a permissible way. It seems that there's inter-inclusion inside of the spheros, and this idea of this inter-inclusion is the aspect of the Kav which is not a measurer, because if it was just merely measuring and delineating everything, and that was its strict role, it would never be that Chesed somehow comes out acting like Gevura, and Gevura sometimes comes out acting like Chesed, because its job is to separate them. We find that sometimes there's an inter-inclusion, and Gevura acts like Chesed, and Chesed acts like Gevura. And that also comes from the Kav, which means the Kav has this total opposite nature of the first one, which is that it makes everything one and reunites them, and makes it that there's no distinctions between things. So it's a peculiar thing, the Kav.
Yeah, but it's not more one and more unified than, as you say, a drop of water in the ocean.
It's a lot more unified, you say?
It's not. It doesn't unify things more than how the spheres are in the inside.
No one's saying that it has to unify at that level, because it does have the other nature of separating. But while it's busy separating, it's also busy binding them. Right? Obviously, it's not the same. I mean, maybe Panemius, it has inside of it even the Or Ein Sof. But in general, if you just look at the Kav, it's not the same level of Gila. Something happened to the light, which made it so that it's not the same quality that it was before the Tzimtzum. But nonetheless, it's still light. And what does light do? It unifies everything. It makes that there is no distinctions, and the Kav does that as well. At deeper levels, like I said, even in Penimius, inside the Kav itself, there is the Or Ein Sof. There is the entire ocean inside of that Kav at some level, and therefore there is a power within the Kav to actually nullify everything back to the state where it was before the Tzimtzum. Even that level is somehow in there, because ultimately the Kav is a drop of Or Ein Sof, and Or Ein Sof only knows to do that. It's just what? It also interacts with the Rishima and the Tzimtzum. So it has, the point is, you're never going to wrap your head around it. It has a dual nature. On one hand it's many, on one hand it's one. Yeah.
Does all of this take place before the smallest thing we know is, as far as I know, is an atom or a molecule or a quark or whatever those really small things are? Does all this take place before it becomes that? Because
you're talking
physical.
about, yeah, exactly. Of course it's physical. Yeah, but the quark exists in all the worlds up there as well. And it was just because it's physical.
Oh, so there's the
but it has a
physical
spiritual
version of it.
source. Yeah, there's a spiritual version of it. So
That's
all those
what we're talking about. We're talking about
spiritual version of reality far before it comes physical. Shekol zehu oidei hakav, and all this takes place from the kav. Hainu lefi shebe'etzem hu b'chinas bli gevul, because the reality is that it's essentially light is infinite. Mitzad shor ba'or ein sof shlifnei hatzimtzum, from the standpoint of its source in the Or Ein Sof, which comes before the tzimtzum, where there is no concept of limitation yet. And even those letters which are in there, we said before, they're like non-entities. They don't impose any limits on the light. And that's home for the kav. So that's its mo. Now we're talking about the reishis of the kav, the very beginning when the kav comes out, before it even has any shaykhs to the gilui of Ak, of the world of Adam Kadmon, the first world. So this is like exactly as it is from its original source as it comes out, before it gets mixed in with really delineating anything. Because the first thing that's going to delineate, the first measuring that it makes is Ak, is the first world of Adam Kadmon. So before it does that, it's not revealing that aspect of its nature, that it's also a divider. It's just straight out of the womb, coming from the Or Ein Sof and being Or Ein Sof, and therefore it's called Ilah HaIlos. And at some level, we're okay with calling that the cause of all causes, because it's pure light that has not yet created any distinction and division in it, even though it's come across the Tzimtzum.
Those 10 spheres are there, though. Those 10 theoretical spheres are there, right?
They are.
At that spot.
They are, but those 10 theoretical spheres are even in the Or Ein Sof, don't forget. It's just that there's absolutely no division in them yet.
What Tzimtzum do they come across?
The great Tzimtzum HaRishon. You know,
Silikar?
Huh?
What,
They see the Kaor, yeah, and they return. Because we're talking about Reishis Hisgalus HaKav, the beginning of the presence of the Kav, for sure. That's defined as something that comes after the Tzimtzum. And yet, it hasn't yet pronounced its nature of dualism and separation, so it's pure Or Ein Sof at that level. V'zeu nikra Ilah HaIlos. That's why we're going to go ahead and sometimes call it the cause of all causes. Even though that term is usually used for mamash what's going on before the Tzimtzum, you see there's a little bit of before the Tzimtzum, even after the Tzimtzum, the very beginning of the Kav's return. V'alzeh om amar keser ilah afal gavdihu or kadmo. And that's what we say, that keser ilah, which is basically like the top of Ak, right? The crown, the skull of Ak. Even though it's an Or Kadmon, even though it is an Or Kadmon, what does that mean? The Keser Ilah kolel bichlal kol madregas mechinas partzuf da'ak adat silus. What is Keser Ilah? He now defines it for us. Thank you. It includes all the levels from Ak until Atzilus, until and not including maybe Atzilus. What's that?
Keser Ilah?
Keser Ilah, right?
So Keser Ilah is a general term for all the levels between
Yes,
beginning of
and
Kav
that's quite a few
to-
levels. Yeah, it has Atik and Arich and Tohu and Tikkun. Right? All these things is basically. I mean, it's hard to say if he goes up until and including Atzilus or up until and not including Atzilus. He said Ad Atzilus.
Well, why would it include Atzilus? It's
It
the
wouldn't
crown of
seem to
Atzilus.
include Atzilus, but if you want to say that Atzilus is also Olamos of Ein Sof, in other words, and that really it's a kesser upon the Bria, I guess you can get away with saying that.
It'd be the Arich of it.
But I hear you. Let's say up until and not including
No,
Atzilus.
because I thought like a crown means it's above. It's
Right, but above what?
above Atzilus.
Okay, it could be also. Okay, it could be also.
How would a crown be including it?
Because Atzilus itself is a crown to the Biyah.
Fine.
In other words, if you're talking about
If you're
creation,
showing the crown of Atzilus.
he didn't say.
Oh, so it didn't even say that. I just said it's a crown.
Right, Keser
So
Ilah.
Atzilus itself could be a crown.
I would
for-
say that
yeah.
let's go with the simple thing that you're saying though. First of all, that it's a crown above Atzilus. He always says it's from parts of Ak ad Hatzilus until Atzilus. You could easily, yeah, exactly. Anyway,
So Keser Ilah includes Keser plus.
yeah, it's like that's what I'm saying. Keser is a general term. Keser means the thing on top. The thing on top goes all the way back to the Orient, so it like touches right up into till basically Ak. That's what he's saying. Like the first world is the beginning of the top, and that goes all the way down to the bottom of the top. The bottom of the top is like what's directly above Atzilus.
So why is it called Keser Ilah? Why wouldn't it just be?
Which is the Keter.
Because that's what Bechlal it's called. It's I don't know. Keser Ilah. You could say it's
Is
called
there a
Keser.
Keser Sitzah?
No. Keser Ilah. Okay, that's just the Zohar calls it. I'm sure that you can make it diyukim, but keeping things simple.
Maybe Keser Ilah just because it's in that first world, in that first level, but another Keser on top of Bria, on top of whatever other.
Maybe perhaps, yeah, it's the original Keser. So the point we're getting at over here, though, without getting into these minushas, maybe it's too late for that, but that it's called Or Kadmon. It says even though this Keser Ilah is called an Or Kadmon, which means a primordial light, it's still considered black before the cause of all causes. Now, what does it mean? This is the Indian of Or Kadmon, Shu Bechinas Ak. Why is it called Or Kadmon? Now we all of a sudden know why it's called the primordial light, because it's the Keser of Ak, right? Or it's the Keser which is Ak. And Ak, what is the name of Ak? Adam Kadmon, right? The primordial man, the original world. So this is called, Keser Ilah is called Or Kadmon, because it essentially is Ak. And everything below it up until Atzilus. And all that is called black, even though it's this awesome light, it's Keser Ilah.
Adam Kadmon.
It's Adam Kadmon, it's Atik, it's Arich, right? It's all the things that happened before Atzilus. All that is called Keser Ilah, and therefore it's called Or Kadmon. It's called the primordial light because it's connected with Adam Kadmon, which is the primordial man.
That means the same thing.
Yeah, basically. And so he's saying that all Adam Kadmon is called black. In other words, Tihara Tata, like we spoke about before, the lower purity is called black before even the Reishis is Galus HaKav, even before the beginning of the Kav's re-entry. It's called, everything below that is called black. You follow? Yeah? Okay. Anyone have questions on that last point? Or
Kadmon is Adam Kadmon?
it's Adam Kadmon plus what's below that, up until Atzilus, right? And all that is called the Keser. Keser and Or is the same thing as Or Kadmon, a primordial light. And that primordial light is called black before the cause of all causes. Okay, Perek Zayin. V'hainu dekol ha'oros v'agiloyim sha'achar ha'tzimtzum hem b'chines ukam. That all lights and revelations that come after the tzimtzum, they are considered black. Except maybe for that very first one. That's right, the beginning of the revelation that comes back. But all lights and revelations after the tzimtzum are called black. Hainu b'chines nahora ukma. And we spoke about this before. It's called the black flame. And this was when we were describing what does it mean, light that's called darkness. We gave the description of a candle. When you see the flame burning, you can look at and you can see the wick is still black. A flame it's on fire. You can see the wick, it's black. How is it black? It's mamash on fire. There's no question that if the fire is coming out of the wick, it's certainly permeating every aspect of the wick. And the place that you see the wick, you're seeing fire, but the fire is black fire. And there's something called black fire. The wick is black and the fire that's touching it is black. It's burning black at that point.
I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, it is.
In a spiritual world?
No, in a
Actuality?
regular physical pashut world. In other words, there's the whole thing. You're saying that there's like, where's the white fire inside of the black wick, right? And the point is, and let me say the spiritual counterpart so you can see what I'm saying, because you might not consider it fire at all. You might say the fire is not on the wick; the fire is coming off the wick. There's no fire on the wick. But like, if you think about it for a second, that's silly. How's the fire getting off the wick if it's not sitting in the wick as well? It's the source of the fire.
Okay.
In the wick, right? And the idea is that Why is it not? Why you're saying that's not light, that's not fire, that's wick? Because this is the whole point he's trying to bring. That's why it is such a perfect analogy. He's saying there's certain light which is called darkness. And in the spiritual analogy, what is that? It's like, for example, godly light that goes all the way down and becomes a human being. It becomes a physical entity. You think that that's not light. You said that's not spiritual. That spiritual is when it goes off the physical entity. But no, it's not true. The actual light manifests itself to the point that it becomes dark. It climbs inside of vessels and becomes vessel-like to the point that where your soul could see infinite worlds because it had spiritual vision, and now it gets cloaked in a physical eye, and it could, maybe if it's lucky, it has 20/20 vision, it could see across the field. In other words, everything becomes encased and one and unified with a material which is not light. But the fact is, it's still alive. So that's what you have inside the wick of your flame. There's fire in there, but the fire became the wick. It's the wick on fire. It's not normal fire. It's black fire. To say that the wick is not on fire, you'd be a fool, right? But what all I'm looking at is a wick. So what's different from this wick from the wick that's sitting next to it, which is not on fire? Is that there's fire inside of this wick, but it's black fire because it encloses itself into the wick and no longer looks like light. It's not a metaphysical thing. It's very simple, and he's now trying to relate that to a metaphysical thing and explain how unbelievably low the descent goes that it becomes black. And he's saying that where does this really start? Not only in Gashmis, but way up in the Kav. The Kav is already an example of that black wick. It's like there's no light there anymore. It's literally called black before Ilah Ha'Elos. It's called dark before the cause of all causes. Because it's no longer shining light. It's light which is like contracted itself inside of some finite thing, which is finite. Light is infinite, right? Light is not finite. If you're looking at something finite, you're not looking at light theoretically. You're looking at darkness. And yet it's all made up of light. What? The Kav is darkness. It's a piece of light.
Could you explain Kav?
Kav, I said to you, it's the line of light which returns after the great contraction of all the light. In other words, Hashem first is infinite light everywhere. There's nothing. And then he removes the infinite light, and then he brings back the Kav, a tiny line of light, which is finite in comparison to what was there before.
Did you say like last time that the Rishima is like something that stays there? You said it's like a stain.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we're
What's
talking about
always
in a
there?
different mimer.
Yeah.
The Kav.
Okay.
Is it different now or?
No, but we're just not talking about that particular topic, but that still stays in place. You understand what we're saying here? So, the idea of the fire transforming into something that doesn't look like fire anymore, but it still is fire, it's called black fire, that's the idea of the Kav. That's what the Kav is. And Kadam Ilah Ha'Elos, right, this is considered black before, in front of, the cause of all causes. In other words, what's the cause of all causes? The actual light, before it has to get busy revealing itself to worlds and having anything to do with containers and vessels. Right? So when all of a sudden when it has anything to do with these vessels, even though it's mamash the Kav, which is it's Adam Kadmon and worlds beyond our comprehension, nonetheless, it's already dealing with entering itself into vessels, and therefore it's considered black compared to what's above it.
Who's this book from? Who wrote it?
The Rebbe Rashab.
He's one of the 7 rabbis?
Yeah. And that's what it says, Ukam Kadam Ilah Ilos. It's called black before the cause of all causes. Va'inyan, we'll just finish this little paragraph. The Inyan, the Gabi Olamos, Zeu B'chines Or V'gilos. So how does it work? So compared to the worlds that are below the Kav, below Adam Kadmon, like Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, that level of Ak is mamash the most infinite light. It's revelation of God. That's their source of knowing what revelation of God is. It's Or V'gilun. That's what we're saying. The Kav has this dual nature. On one hand, it's light. It unites everything. It has light, and it's made of light. So compared to everything that comes below it, it's mamash light. Don't call it black. It's light. It's the source of all light. That's why it's called this wondrously refined light. But that very light is considered black and darkness compared to the true light. Liyoso rak lahayras hachoshech, because it's only light which is intended to come down into dark places and shine them up. V'zeu v'yavdil lukim ben ha'or ben ha'choshech. So back to the original pasuk, the whole thing is based on from mimers and mimers already. That's what it means, that Hashem divided between the light and the darkness. He separated the light and the darkness on the first day. Hainu b'chinas or atzmi b'chinas ha'or shel ha'hayir. He separated the essential light from the light which is designated to shine into worlds. What was the separation? The tzimtzum. Because as we said in the beginning of this class, the tzimtzum is what enabled the infinite nature of the kav to be severed and become something on its own. Like the drop of water in the ocean, when it's inside the ocean, it's mixed in with the ocean and one. So the idea of the removal of the entire ocean, which is called the tzimtzum, enables there to be now for the first time a presence and the appearance of just one single drop all by itself. So it's the tzimtzum which allows for the separation. If there wasn't a removal of everything, you couldn't then delineate one aspect of it. This is the tzimtzum mavdil ben or ein sof lifnei tzimtzum, which separates the or ein sof before the tzimtzum on one side and the or that's after the tzimtzum on the other side. We'll take it tomorrow.
Thank you.